Hi, it's Miss Teeter, and I'm going to show you how to trim a pot today. It could be trimming a bowl, it could be trimming a mug, but basically we're going to flip the bowl or the mug upside down, or bottle, or whatever you're making. We're going to center it on the wheel, and we end up carving away what's called the foot of the pot. Okay, so you can see that the middle part here is hollowed out, hopefully about as deep as the same edge, so that it looks like this is just a ring that is kind of sitting on the bottom of a round bowl. It's kind of the look that we're going for. It's really nice when you set it down on a table, you only just have this little bit of surface area touching. Sometimes you can glaze the middle in here, and then you can leave this part unglazed to fire in the kiln. I like having a little bit of an undercut in here because it can stop the glaze from running a bit. It ends up welling a little bit there because we don't want our glaze to stick. Other advantages of trimming is it makes the bowl or the mug or whatever you're making a little bit lighter. Now there's lots of different styles for trimming, and I encourage you to look at other artists and how they trim, but this is just the way that I'm going to teach you, and I recommend starting with, and then you can really alter the way that you do it after you have some practice and experience, and you can try out new things. Okay. So as far as tools for trimming goes, it's helpful to have a large loop tool or ribbon tool for just carving away larger areas. I like having a smaller tool as well for carving more details and edges. I really like this one that has kind of the square tip. Oh, I just realized this one's broken. This one has a little bit of a nice clean edge here for defining your foot, and then having a needle tool is helpful also. Okay, so first of all, the consistency of the clay should be like a Parmesan cheese consistency. So you want it to be like a good hard cheese. Not really soft, not melty, but you should feel like you would be able to grate it really easily, because that's essentially what we're going to be kind of doing with the tools. So if it feels really soft, if it feels sticky, you can give it some more time. You could blow dry it or put a fan on it until it feels a little bit stiffer, like almost leather hard. Okay, then you'll place it upside down on your wheel, and we'll need to center the clay here. So you can see that I have my finger staying in the same place, and it's moving away from my finger, and then it's hitting my finger. And what I'm going to do is every time that it moves away from my finger, I'll tap it towards my finger. And then once I get pretty close, I think about picking up on the rhythm that it's making, where it touches and moves and touches and moves. And so I try to tap with that rhythm. One important thing is that you should always be centering towards the base of your pot rather than the rim, because your rim could be warped a little bit. So finger towards the base. Okay, it's pretty close now. Now I'll teach you one other trick for just fine-tuning your centering, especially when you're starting out. It can be pretty tough. You can get really close towards the top, where you're going to trim it off anyways, and hold a needle tool. Nice and steady. All right, then I can stop the wheel. I can see that my needle tool carved a little line right here, because that's where it was touching. I look for the middle of that line where it was closest, and I can move a little bit in the opposite direction, just a smidge. I'll try that one more time. Then you can smooth out your needle tool line with your finger a little bit. And you can try it again to see if you got it just right. And if your needle tool or your finger can just gently like grace the side of the pot all the way around without digging in, then that means that you have gotten your pot good and centered. Okay, now we want to get this thing stuck on the wheel really secure so that it doesn't move. We don't want to undo all the hard work that we just did centering it. So take 4 little pieces of soft clay and just ball it up, and then I roll it into like a little mini hot dog shape, just like that. Nothing fancy. And then you want to hold your pot carefully in place as you kind of wrap this around the contour of the rim just a little bit without bumping it. And then I squish the clay down to the wheel, and can see how it's really holding it in place because it kind of wraps around a little bit on that side. Okay. I'll do this 4 times, so go directly across, roll my little hot dog shape, contour around the rim of the pot, and press it down. And I'm making sure that I'm pressing the clay down to the wheel and trying not to squish it into the rim at all. I want to hold the rim in place, but I don't want to squish it and warp it. Also, why it's really important to make sure that your pot isn't too wet because it will warp very easily. Okay, so now you can see how that's stuck on there really well and it's supported. Okay, now we're going to actually start trimming. One thing that I really should have mentioned in the very beginning here was that you want to kind of get a good feel for your pot first. I'll take this one and be like, okay, how much thickness do I have on the bottom edge here? About how much thickness do I have on the very bottom here? Because you do not want to trim through it. If you trim through, you don't have a coffee mug or bowl anymore. You have a flower pot with lots of drainage. And that can be unfortunate if you want a mug or a bowl, okay? So I know that on this pot, I don't have a ton of room here on the sides, but it was pretty thick on the bottom. I'm going to take my loop tool. I hold it very, very securely in my hand. I have my elbows braced on my sides, just like when I'm centering or throwing. And I'll just hold the tool up to the pot while it's spinning. I get like a medium speed going with the wheel and a light pressure with the tool. I'm just trying to take off any excess clay that you might have just skirting around the bottom here. And this is going to be a lot like little chocolate shavings or something. Sometimes I put a little bit of downward pressure on here if I have something that's top heavy, especially if I'm making kind of a taller, thinner mug or a vase or a bottle or a pitcher. That downward pressure can really help to stabilize it. Then I can take off any excess clay also on the top or any just jaggedy edges. And I can switch the camera here so you can see that. Okay, now that I have it smoothed out on both edges and I've thinned it out a little bit on the top and the bottom, I'm going to define what the edges of my foot will be. So the foot, like I said, is this part that's kind of meant to be like a ring that sits on the bottom of the bowl. So here's a good time to use the needle tool to draw where you want the outside of the foot to be and where you want the inside edge of the foot to be. So I'll just hold my hand really still, let the wheel spin, and it's kind of just like a needle on a record player. And I've created a line. That'll be the outer edge of my foot. And then I'll create another line on the inside. I'd recommend that when you're starting out try to make the foot pretty wide so that you have a little bit more room for error. But as you become more developed in your skill, you can start to make some skinnier feet. Now here's where I like to use the smaller tool, is just for when I start to define my edges. So I'll start out by just hollowing, or just kind of scooping out this inside part by lining up the edge of my tool with the edge of my line from the needle tool. Okay, so I've scooped that out, using as much of that stable elbow hand position as possible. And then I like to use whatever is the biggest tool I can use for the job to make it like nice and smooth and consistent. So I'll come in now and scoop out the rest of this part with my bigger tool. That way I won't get lots and lots of little scratchy marks. I think it's a lot like if you're painting a picture, and if you're using a really tiny paintbrush to paint in a big sky, you're gonna have lots of little paintbrush strokes. This is a little bit on the soft and sticky side. Okay, I have that hollowed out. Now I want to try to find the same amount of depth that I have here to match where I dig in here, so that it, like I said, it just looks like a ring that's sitting there. So I can take my tool and I'll start to take this little corner off. And then I'll just go trim down as deep as the inside part. I can hold my tool sideways. I'll move it over here. I can use my tool sideways to start to clean up that edge. And I can adjust the angle of the tool to shape the bottom of this pot like the same way that you would if you were wood turning or something. Again, now that I have it mostly defined, it's kind of nice to switch back to a bigger tool. I wish I had something a little bit between the size of these two. It's kind of a big jump. But I just want to smooth this out and trim it as much as it needs to be so that it's really thin and light at the base. I can give a little bit of pressure with my finger, and if I feel a lot of give, then it means that it's getting pretty thin. If it feels pretty rock hard, then I can go a bit deeper. Okay. Can still trim a little bit more. This was a bit thick at the bottom. I might even come in and go a little bit deeper on both parts of the foot, the inside and the outside. And you just keep trimming away until you're pretty satisfied. To finish this off, I want everything about this pot to look like it was thrown by my fingers, not by a metal tool or any kind of a mechanical process. So I want to just smooth it out and get rid of any kind of scratchy parts. Sometimes it's nice to just wet your fingers with a little bit of water. Just really, really light and damp, barely any water on there, but just enough so that they'll glide. And I'll tend to it's gonna be on the side. Okay, I'll tend to push right here. And I just use my finger to smooth that out. Another thing you could use if you want like it really smooth is you could use a rib tool. Just trying to get rid of any of those scratchy tool marks. Again, I like a little bit of fingerprint marks on there because I think it looks nice and handmade. I'll do that as well, just running my finger along the foot. It's really important to soften any sharp or harsh edges on the foot. Think about it, you want to slide this mug across the good dining room table and scratch it up. And then definitely give some nice pressure in here to smooth out the very foot. At the very bottom. Okay, lastly, don't forget to sign your name on the bottom. Any piece that's going to be fired in the kiln has to have a name. It could be a name, initials. So now you can see that we have a foot on this. It's going to be a mug. I'll put a handle on it, but it'll rest really nicely on the table. It makes it lighter to pick up. I'll be able to glaze all the way down here and on the bottom, and this should turn out to be pretty nice.